Hi, my name is Mark Richey. I'm a YieldPro Specialist with Harvest Land Co-op.
Good morning, Glenn Longabaugh, Regional Agronomist with Winfield United.
Glenn, we're out here at the answer plot again today and just enjoying this wonderful weather. But what are some things as we're going into harvest, especially on the corn side of things, that we can look at to maybe higher prioritize a field that maybe we need to get out and go get before some of the others?
Sure. So if we're talking about prioritizing harvest, right, we can think about prioritizing it now and
Right.
look for those signs, those symptomology that would lead us to say, hey, this is a field we need to keep an eye on. And then we might unpack later what you do as we get to physiological maturity. Right now, what I would be looking for is things like Physoderma, right? We've already identified that Physoderma is in this plot. It's the little black specks. If it's in the upper part of the plant, it's not a big deal. But when you see those little black specks that are coalescing down at the bottom, Physoderma has the ability to actually reduce stalk integrity. And those are fields, if you see that you probably want to go to first. Another thing to look for, you think about the suboptimal conditions we had this last spring. All of these low areas are showing nitrogen deficiency now. So when you see that yellowing up the midrib of the plant, that is symptomology that often leads to crown rot later on in the year. So as we approach physiological maturity, right, and corn starts to senesce, then you can get more active, more proactive in determining how you're going to prioritize your harvest. And probably the best way is to literally do a push test, right? So you go into the interior of the field and basically you give the plants a really good shove, right? Try to get them completely over into the next row because you don't know when the next derecho is going to come hit us, right? And we don't want to pick corn up off the ground. So I would prioritize those fields. Don't just harvest them in the order that you planted.
Yep.
Actually go do a little reconnaissance. It doesn't take that much time, and it can potentially save you a lot of heartache later on.
Okay. Another question I get asked a bunch, especially when the combines get rolling, is what's that economical threshold that's coming out the back end of a combine? I mean, they're always asking me, what's that look like?
Absolutely. I get questioned on harvest losses all the time. And there are all kind of losses, right? So it's true. If we don't open our machines up, we're trying too hard to get great quality. Oftentimes we can move the crop out on the ground. And with number 2 yellow corn, there's a fair amount of FM that actually is allowed. Mm-hmm. But in addition to that, right, for those growers that think I'm going to save myself rich by leaving that crop in the field and harvesting it bone dry, do you realize that when you do that, there's a lot more head losses, right? When that ear is being pulled through those stripper plates by the snap and rolls and it hits with impact, you'll often see a lot of splatter. Another really common problem that growers do is they want to harvest soybeans first and then move to corn. And there's several problems with that. One is you're going to make fewer bushels automatically because of mystery yield loss, right? Mystery yield loss is that loss of dry matter accumulation, even beyond harvest losses, just from letting corn dry down. Purdue University a few years ago kind of figured out what that mystery yield loss was. It's actually respiration. It's the embryo of the seed, of the grain, is actually using some of the dry matter to respire until it goes into stasis. But in addition to that, right, harvest losses become more significant the later we get because dry grain is much more prone to head shell. In addition to that, when we do all of our bean harvest in good conditions and then we wait for it to start raining, man, if you want to see head losses, shell dry corn whenever it's a little bit damp out. I mean, it looks like a fountain. And it only takes about 2 kernels per square foot to make up a bushel of corn. So the losses are truly significant. And you'll see it on those years where you harvest early. You can see all the volunteer corn coming out.
Yep.
But lots and lots of opportunity to make bushels.
All right. Thanks, Glenn. That's some great insight on corn. Let's head down to soybeans and take a look at them and some things we can think about there. Hi, Mark Richey here again with Glenn. We've moved down to the soybeans here at the answer plot. Glenn, what are some things we can think about as we're approaching soybeans we can think about on harvest loss?
Sure. No, that's a great question. So, this last winter we held a lot of meetings on high yield soybeans. We encouraged growers to use fungicides and that sort of thing. We planted early. We probably have a bit too many plants in the field, right? We probably got a little better stand we need, and there's a lot of height on these soybeans. And so here's just a few things, right? One, you need to actually go out and check the moisture on these beans, right? When you use fungicides, these beans are going to stay they're going to stay green longer, and they're going to keep their leaves longer. It is very likely that growers are going to have some leaves still attached to the plant when they've got soybeans at 13% moisture or less, right? So if you're one of those growers that has practiced high yield practices, you probably need to think about starting before you visually see soybeans at R8 and they're just brown sticks out there, right? So that would be one thing. Two, because of this height, right, it typically get a lot more head shattering, right, a lot more losses when you don't have your head or your reel adjusted right. Now those growers that have the draper headers, right? They have a huge advantage on these big, tall soybeans because they're not going to bridge that crossauger that's pulling soybeans in. So the guys that have draper headers, probably not nearly as big. But for those that are still using a conventional table on those growers, you'll need to be really conscious about how you bring those beans in, right? When beans get tall and ropey, a lot of guys will try to pull the beans in, and maybe instead of speeding it up and moving it in, the real strategy might be to slow it down and move it out so that it kind of pushes the beans over. When they get cut, they spring in underneath the crossauger. I know that most of these growers know how to harvest soybeans, but you just need to know that harvest losses on soybeans can be pretty substantial, right? And the moisture on soybeans is 13%. If you literally wait for soybeans to get completely dry, often you're shelling or you're cutting 9-10% soybeans. And if you want to have a lot of harvest losses, go out and let soybeans first of all lose the value of 3 points of moisture, and then add the additional harvest losses. It's a no-brainer. Growers should be more aggressive about going after soybeans.
Yep. All right, thank you very much, Glenn. There's a lot to think about there, especially as much as we're trying to keep these plants healthy. I mean, that's good thought there to get out there and check them before we get too far into
Absolutely. And you know what? You don't have to do this alone. You can contact your YieldPro specialist, say, hey, would you come out and take a look behind my combine? Would you help me, get a second pair of eyes on it? Man, yep. I think most YieldPro specialists would be more than happy to go out and help you with your harvest needs.
Yep. All right. Thank you very much.